Alrighty, finally out of COVID-19 lockdown, and I think this virus is going to leave a lasting impression on the country, so I thought it was fitting to go and have a look at something else that's left a lasting impression. Cook's first landing in New Zealand. So I'm heading up to Anuara Bay, which on the map says it's his first landing place. So I've got a copy of Cook's journals, and I'll have a look at that location and have a look at his journals and see how they match up. And if you're wondering why this video sounds a bit different than usual, it's because the microphone in my helmet stopped working. So this is a cheesy voiceover. Okay, here we are at the place that on the map says it is Cook's first landing in New Zealand. I could definitely imagine Cook sailing into the bay here, anchoring just offshore, sending a few boats in, coming into the beach, and doing the stuff he did, which I will mention later. But to tell the truth, even though it says on the map that there's a thing saying that this is the first landing place, the only commemoration around here, or the only monument of any kind, is a small plaque that says Cook's first landing, or the bicentennial of Cook's first landing, was commemorated at this point in 1969. Doesn't say it actually happened, just says it was commemorated. And I'll read a little bit out of Cook's journal, just to let you know why they may have actually said it was commemorated rather than it actually happened here. So Sunday the 8th, October 1769. Gentle breezes between the east, northeast and north, clear weather. At 5 PM seen the opening of a bay that appeared to run pretty far inland. This one doesn't actually land pretty far inland actually, not by his standards. Hauled our wind and stood in it. But as soon as night came, we kept plying on and off until daylight. We found ourselves leeward of the bay, the wind being at the north. By noon we fetched in with a southwest point, but not being able to weather it, we tacked and stood off. Yeah, he goes into a lot of detail about his sailing. He's a sailor. We saw in the bay several canoes, people upon the shore, and some houses in the country. Not sure if it's these houses, but could imagine there being a small population around the shore here. The land on the sea coast is high with steep white cliffs, and back inland are very high mountains. Certainly from the shore here I can't see big mountains. However, if you look over there, you probably can't see in this camera, there are steep cliffs around there. Also, that island, and especially the seaward facing thing, being very cliffy, and cliffs at the other end of the bay as well, very steep ones there. The face of the country is of a hilly surface and appears to be clothed with wood and vegetation. So yes, this part does match that description. However, he would have mentioned that there's an island at one end of the bay. He goes into a lot of detail in other places about every land feature you just heard there in that entry. He would have said that the cliffs aren't just at the north end, but at the south end. Also, the next day, that I'll come on to later, he actually lands, and says he lands at the mouth of a river, and it's a river that he can't ford and has to get a boat across. this here is the only river I can find in the bay. And it's barely even a stream. It doesn't even make it all the way to the sea. So, okay, landforms may have changed in 200 years. Perfectly willing to accept that. They sort of change day to day, year to year. However, there is nothing, I've walked up and down this beach, there is nothing indicating any sizable river. None of the landforms seem to suggest that. So, on the way back home, I will stop at another place that they say was his first landing. And it certainly meets the criteria a lot more. And I will read a little bit more from his journal, just to sound like a proper historian. That being said, lovely spot for a night out. If your idea of a night out is being away from everything. So, now in Gisborne, the more likely spot for Cook's Landing. As you can see, a much bigger bay. Well, you probably can't see very well on this camera from here. Right over in the distance there is the south and sort of northerly entrance there. So, as you sort of mentioned, a river that was not fordable. Okay, it's been manually altered quite a lot, but certainly you would not be able to ford this river any time in its recent history. Can't see from here because the trees are in the way. Sort of mountainous inland with some sort of hills. Also, he mentions the depth, I think it was, of being, oh, I can't remember what it was, 10 fathoms or something. The other bay wasn't that. This bay is. So yes, definitely more likely candidate. And there we go, we have the statue to young Nick, who was the first to actually sight the country on the ship. So this is young Nick's head. So yes, all in all, a much more likely sighting spot. So, find somewhere and read you what happened next though, because that's the contentious bit. After this I went ashore with a party of men, accompanied by Mr. Banks and Dr. Solander. We landed abreast of the ship and on the east side of the river just mentioned, but seeing some of the natives on the other side of the river, whom I was desirous to speaking with, and finding that we could not ford the river, I ordered the yawl to carry us over and the pinnace to lay at the entrance. In the meantime, the Indians made off, referring to any natives. However, we went as far as their huts, which lay about 200 or 300 yards from the waterside, leaving 4 boys to take care of the yawl, which we had no sooner left than 4 men came out of the woods on the other side of the river and would certainly have cut her off had not the people in the pinnace discovered them and called her to drop down the stream, which they did, being closely pursued by the Indians. The coxswain who had charge of the boat, seeing this, fired 2 muskets over their heads. The first made them stop and look around, but the second they took no notice upon, which a third was fired and killed one of them upon the spot, just as he was going to dart his spear at the boat. At this, the other 3 stood motionless for a minute or 2, seemingly quite surprised, wondering no doubt what it was that had thus killed their comrade. But as soon as they recovered themselves, they made off, dragging the dead body a little way up, and Len left it. So, okay, I'm not a good narrator, but that's Cook's account. And later on he actually goes on and says the he wasn't entirely happy with the way things happened. Because later on, hang on, I'll try and find what happened a little bit later on from that. In the morning, seeing a good number of the natives in the same place where we saw them last night, I went to the shore with the boats, manned and armed, and landed on the opposite side of the river. Mr. Banks, Dr. Solander and myself at first only landed and then went to the side of the river, and the natives then got together on the opposite side. We called to them in St. George's Island language, but they answered us by flourishing their weapons over their heads and dancing, as we supposed the war dance. Upon this, we retired until the Marines were landed. So it was already thinking there was a battle on, which ought to be drawn up about 200 yards behind us. We then went again to the riverside, having Tupia, Mr. Green and Dr. Monkhouse along with us. Tupia spoke to them in his own language, which was an agreeable surprise to us to find that they perfectly understood him. So that in itself is pretty extraordinary. Picking up someone from an island miles away as a guide, and the languages being so similar that they could actually communicate quite easily. After some little conversation in the past, one of them swam over to us, and after having 20 or 30 more, the last brought their arms with them, which the first man did not. We made them everyone presents, but this does not satisfy them. They wanted about everything we had about us, particularly our arms, and made several attempts to snatch them out of our hands. Tupia told us several times, as soon as they came over, to take care of ourselves, for they were not our friends. And this we very soon found out. One of them snatched Mr. Green's hanger from him and would not give it up. This encouraged the rest to be more insolent, and seeing the others coming over to join them, they ordered the man who had taken the hanger to be fired at, which was accordingly done, and wounded in such a manner as he died soon after. Upon the first fire, which was only 2 muskets, the others retired to a rock which lay nearly in the middle of the river. Upon seeing the man fallen, they returned probably to carry him off or his arms, the last of which they accomplished, and this we could not prevent unless we had run our bayonets into them. For upon their returning off the rock, we discharged of our pieces, which were loaded with small shot, and we had 3 more. But these got over the river and were carried off by the others, who now thought proper to retire. So, if you think about it, that is an extraordinarily bad start to race relations. Whether it was misunderstandings on both sides, cultural differences, or just incredibly bad judgment, which I think incredibly bad judgment is probably the nicer way to actually phrase it. So within minutes of first landing, he shoots someone who's trying to steal their boat, or may have just been trying to look at it. Who knows? Too long ago for anyone to really account. And then these other ones coming over, if they had taken Tupia's advice and been a lot more careful, once they knew that they were not there as friends, they might have been able to retire to their boats, and there would not have been a problem. But now we have this legacy built upon white man landing in this country and immediately killing some of the locals. No matter which way you phrase it, not a good start to things. So, I'm no historian, and this is certainly not a complete history. This is just a couple of things read out of Cook's journal. So worth trying to find out a little bit more from the oral histories on the other side, which I may do at a later date, try and find someone who can tell me whether there are any family accounts been handed down of the way they saw things going down. But anyway, that is the story of Cook's first landing in New Zealand. And on that incredibly miserable note, I'm going to jump on my bike and ride home before it starts raining again. And I look forward to getting a nice warm shower when I get home. So while I'm having lunch and taking in this view down into Poverty Bay, I'll let you know a little bit about what Captain Cook did after that atrocious start to his landing in New Zealand. He thought, quite rightly, need to step back and let these people know that we actually come in peace. So his plan to do that was to kidnap some of the chiefs. He thought, bring them onto the boat by force so that he can explain to them that they come in peace. Yeah. So when some canoes came around their boat the next day, they tried to grab some of them. Canoes made off a little bit. As soon as they were fleeing, they fired some guns over their heads to try and convince them to stop. Of course that didn't do it. They just paddled a bit further away and then turned around and started shaking their spears at him. And in the end, he managed to kidnap 3 boys. He said the oldest was about 20. But got them on board, and as soon as they realised they were safe, he said, you know, they treated them with every kindness, and they became cheerful, to the extent where I'm not sure it was that day or a couple of days later or something, when they went to take them back to the beach, they wouldn't leave. And they thought maybe this was because it was a different tribe that they'd thought was theirs, that they were going to give these kids back to. But again, another bad judgment from Cook. Start off by shooting the people and then kidnap their children. So he may have had good intentions along the way, but just things did not work out the way he thought they would, and a man of his experience you would have thought would have a little bit more common sense. Anyway, that's my take on it. So, that was the addendum to this video. Now, continue the ride home.